What's it like being depressed?
I don't know.
Have you ever felt like you're drowning in a sea of sadness with no way out? Depression is a debilitating condition that affects millions worldwide. But do you know how to recognize the signs? What if I told you there are 8 telltale symptoms that could help you or a loved one get the help needed? Hello and welcome back to our channel. First, Self Unlimited will like to thank you for all your support, and it means a lot. And today we're going to dive into a topic that's often misunderstood and stigmatized, but it's so important that we talk about it openly and honestly. We're going to discuss the 8 major signs of depression, and trust me, by the end of this video, you'll have a much better understanding of what depression really looks like. Depression is a complex mental health condition that affects millions of people worldwide, and it's not something that should be swept under the rug or ignored. It's a serious issue that deserves our attention and compassion. Now, before we get started, let me just say that if you or someone you know is struggling with depression, please don't hesitate to seek help. There's no shame in reaching out for support, and there are so many resources available to help you through this challenging time. All right, let's get into it. 1. Hopeless outlook. The first sign of depression we're going to talk about is a hopeless outlook. Have you ever felt like there's just no point to anything? Like no matter what you do, nothing will ever get better? That's the kind of hopeless mindset that often accompanies depression. People who are depressed often feel like they're worthless or that everything is just too much effort. They might think, it's all my fault, or what's the point? These negative thought patterns can be really debilitating and make it hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's like they're stuck in a dark, endless tunnel with no way out. It's important to note that different racial and ethnic groups may experience and express these feelings of hopelessness differently. For example, the National Health Interview Survey found that Hispanic and Latino individuals are the most likely to report feeling hopeless all or most of the time, followed by people of 2 or more races. So, if you or someone you know is constantly feeling like there's no hope, no reason to keep going, that could be a major sign of depression. I remember when my friend Mark was going through a really tough time with depression. He would constantly say things like, "What's the point of even trying? Nothing is going to change." It was heartbreaking to see him in such a dark place, where he couldn't see any light or positivity in his life. It got to the point where he started questioning his worth and purpose in life. He would say things like, "I'm a failure," or "I don't deserve to be happy." It was like he had given up on himself and the world around him. And the crazy thing is, Mark was such a talented artist and had so much potential. But his depression had completely clouded his ability to see that. All he could see was hopelessness and despair. It wasn't until he sought professional help and started therapy that he was able to slowly break out of that hopeless mindset. That's the thing about a hopeless outlook. It's not just a passing feeling of sadness or discouragement. It's a deep-rooted belief that things will never get better, and it can be incredibly difficult to overcome without proper treatment and support. So don't write it off as just a bad day or a temporary funk. Listen to those feelings of hopelessness and reach out for support. 2. Loss of interest. All right, moving on to the next sign, loss of interest. This one is a big one, folks. Depression can suck the joy and pleasure out of the things you used to love. Maybe you used to love playing sports or going out with friends, but now you just can't seem to find the motivation or interest in those activities anymore. In 2020, a staggering 90% of people who identified with more than one race reported symptoms of depression, including this loss of interest, to Mental Health America. It's a common experience across different racial and ethnic groups. Another study found that Black and Hispanic individuals were 1.5 to 2 times more likely than white people to experience a loss of interest in everyday life. It's a pervasive symptom that can really take a toll on someone's quality of life. Losing interest in sex is also a common sign of depression. A decreased sex drive or even impotence can be a symptom of major depression. So if you or someone you know has completely lost interest in the things they used to love, it could be a major red flag for depression. 3. Increased fatigue and sleep problems. Okay, next up, we've got increased fatigue and sleep problems. Now, this one is a doozy because it can be really debilitating and make it hard to function on a daily basis. People living with depression often feel an overwhelming sense of fatigue and lack of energy. They might feel like they just can't get out of bed or like everything is just too much effort. This can lead to excessive sleeping or spending a lot of time in bed. It's interesting to note that some cultural groups, like Asian and Pacific Islander people, may report feeling tired or sleepy rather than using the word depressed. This is because there can be cultural stigmas or different ways of expressing these feelings. On the flip side, depression is also linked to insomnia and a lack of restful sleep. It's like a vicious cycle. The depression makes it hard to sleep, and the lack of sleep exacerbates the depression. It can be a real struggle. So if you or someone you know is constantly feeling fatigued and having trouble sleeping, it could be a sign that depression is at play. 4. Anxiety. All right, moving on to the next sign, anxiety. Now, this one might seem a bit counterintuitive because we often think of depression and anxiety as separate issues. But the truth is, they often go hand in hand. People with depression can experience a whole host of anxiety symptoms like nervousness, restlessness, a sense of danger or panic, rapid heartbeat, rapid breathing, sweating, trembling, and trouble focusing. In Mental Health America's 2020 screenings, Native Americans and American Indians were the most likely to report high levels of anxiety, as well as a sharp increase in moderate to severe depression after 2019. It's important to remember that anxiety and depression can feed off each other and create a vicious cycle. The anxiety can exacerbate the depression, and the depression can worsen the anxiety. So if you or someone you know is dealing with both depression and anxiety symptoms, it's important to seek help and address both issues. 5. Irritability in men. Now, this next sign is one that's often overlooked, especially when it comes to men's mental health: irritability. Research shows that men with depression may experience irritability, escapist or risky behavior, substance abuse, or misplaced anger, rather than the more traditional symptoms of sadness or hopelessness. Men are generally less likely than women to recognize depression or seek treatment for it. They're more likely to get help when their symptoms fit the traditional mold, but they might not identify their irritability or other strong feelings as something requiring treatment. It's important to note that depression can affect the sexes differently, and we need to be aware of these gender-specific symptoms. So if you know a man in your life who's been unusually irritable, angry, or engaging in risky behaviors, it could be a sign that he's struggling with depression. 6. Changes in appetite and weight. All right, let's move on to the next sign, changes in appetite and weight. Now, this one can go either way. Some people with depression will have an increased appetite and gain weight, while others will lose their appetite and lose weight. The key thing to look out for is whether these changes in appetite and weight are intentional or not. If they're not intentional, it could be a sign that depression is the culprit. Depression can mess with our body's natural hunger cues and metabolism, leading to either overeating or undereating, and these changes can have a ripple effect on our overall health and well-being. So, if you or someone you know has experienced significant unintentional changes in appetite and weight, it's worth considering whether depression could be playing a role. 7. Uncontrollable emotions. Next up, we've got uncontrollable emotions. This is one of the more obvious signs of depression, but it's still worth discussing in depth. People with depression often experience mood swings and emotional outbursts that seem to come out of nowhere. One minute, they're angry and lashing out, and the next, they're crying uncontrollably. These emotional ups and downs can be really difficult to manage and can take a toll on personal and professional relationships. It's important to remember that these uncontrollable emotions aren't something that the person can just get over or snap out of. They're a symptom of the underlying depression and require professional help and support. So if you or someone you know is experiencing these wild emotional fluctuations, it could be a major sign that depression is at play. Let me give you an example from my own life. A few years back, when I was struggling with depression, my emotions were all over the place. I'd be perfectly fine one moment, and then something as small as spilling my coffee would set me off into an uncontrollable fit of rage or tears. It was like I had no control over my emotional responses, and it was really scary and confusing for me and my loved ones. I remember one time I was having a perfectly normal conversation with my wife, and suddenly I just broke down crying for no apparent reason. She was so concerned and had no idea what was going on with me. It was then that I realized I needed to seek help because these uncontrollable emotions were not only affecting me, but also the people around me. The thing about depression is that it can make you feel like you're on an emotional roller coaster and the slightest thing can trigger an intense reaction. It's like your emotions are amplified and you have no filter or control over them. That's why it's so important to recognize this sign and seek help. While it's perfectly normal to experience a range of emotions in our daily lives, when those emotions become so intense and unpredictable that they interfere with your ability to function, it's a clear indication that something more serious is going on. And let me tell you, getting help for my depression was one of the best decisions I ever made. Not only did it help me manage my emotions better, but it also gave me the tools and support I needed to work through the underlying issues that were causing my depression in the first place. 8. Looking at death. All right, we've made it to the final and most serious sign of depression, looking at death or suicidal ideation. Depression is sometimes connected to thoughts of suicide or self-harm, and it's a topic that we need to approach with sensitivity and care. In 2020, nearly 46,000 people died by suicide in the United States, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. While Black people are less likely to die by suicide than white people, Black teenagers are more likely to attempt suicide than white teenagers. It's important to note that some groups, like American Indian and Native American people, are far more likely to die by suicide than any other group, followed by white people. In Mental Health America's online screenings, a staggering 46% of American Indians and Native Americans reported thinking about suicide or self-harm in 2020, and the number of those having such thoughts increased by 7.5% over 2019. These statistics are heartbreaking, but they highlight the importance of recognizing suicidal ideation as a major sign of depression and taking action to get help. If someone in your life is talking about suicide or self-harm, it's crucial that you take it seriously and encourage them to seek professional help immediately. You can also reach out to organizations like the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline for support and guidance. Remember, those who die by suicide usually show symptoms of depression or mental health issues first. Often people will talk about it or make a first attempt before succeeding in ending their lives. When someone is at immediate risk of self-harm or hurting others, it's important to take action. If you're ever in a situation where someone is at immediate risk, don't hesitate to call emergency services or take them to the nearest hospital. Their safety and well-being should be the top priority. Well, that wraps up our discussion on the 8 major signs of depression. I know it was a heavy topic, but it's so important that we have these conversations openly and honestly. Depression is a serious mental health condition that can manifest in many different ways, and it's crucial that we know how to recognize the signs, both in ourselves and in those around us. Remember, there's no shame in seeking help for depression. It's a treatable condition, and there are so many resources available to support you on your journey to better mental health. And you're not alone in this struggle, and there's no need to suffer in silence. Before I go, I want to leave you with a request. If you found this video helpful, do me a favor and give it a thumbs up. It really helps me out and lets me know that you're finding value in this type of content. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another video from me. I've got a ton of great stuff lined up, covering various mental health topics, self-care tips, and more. If you or someone you know is struggling with depression, don't hesitate to reach out to a mental health professional, a support group, or a crisis hotline. You don't have to go through this alone. Let's work together to break down the stigma surrounding mental health and create a more compassionate and understanding world for those living with depression and other mental health conditions. Thanks for joining me for this important discussion. Remember, you've got this, and there's always hope, even in the darkest of times.